Welcome to Midnight Whispers, where the night doesn't whisper, it warns. As you lie in the safety of your bed, imagine footsteps in the forest, eyes watching from behind the trees, and truths too terrifying to ignore. These aren't just stories, they're echoes from the shadows, real accounts whispered under breath by those who survived. So close your eyes, but don't fall asleep too fast. The darkness remembers. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Working as a 911 dispatcher in Millbrook County wasn't supposed to haunt me like this. 7 years into the job and I thought I'd heard it all. Car accidents, domestic disputes, medical emergencies. You develop a thick skin, learn to compartmentalize. But that Tuesday night in October 2019, everything changed. I was pulling a double shift, coffee number 5 going cold next to my keyboard when the call came through at 11:47 p.m. The caller ID showed a local number. And when I answered with my standard greeting, I heard breathing so quiet I almost thought it was a pocket dial. Then came the whisper that still echoes in my nightmares. "Please help me," the voice said, barely audible. A young girl couldn't have been more than 16 or 17. "He's here, Tyler's here, and he's trying to get in." I immediately flagged it as priority 1 while keeping my voice steady and calm, just like training taught us. My fingers flew across the keyboard, dispatching units to the address that popped up on my screen. 1847 Maple Grove Lane, a quiet neighborhood on the north side of town. The girl's name was Emma Winters, and as I pulled up her information, my screen filled with previous incident reports. A restraining order filed 3 months ago against Tyler Brennan, age 19. Multiple stalking complaints. A chill ran through me as I realized this wasn't just another scared teenager calling about a noise outside. "Emma, I need you to stay calm," I said, activating the recording system and putting on my headset for better audio. "Officers are on their way. Where are you right now?" There was a shuffling sound, fabric rustling, and then her voice came back even quieter. "I'm in my bedroom closet. My parents went to Indianapolis for their anniversary. They won't be back until tomorrow afternoon." My heart sank. She was alone. I could hear something in the background now, a rhythmic sound that made my skin crawl. Thud, 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 like someone kicking a door, testing its strength. "Is your bedroom door locked?" I asked while sending additional notes to the responding units. "Juvenile home alone. Suspect attempting entry." The response came back. Unit 2, 3, and Unit 4, 5 en route. ETA 8 minutes. 8 minutes. In our job, we know that 8 minutes can be a lifetime. Emma's breathing got faster, more panicked. Yes, but he already broke through the back door. I heard the glass shatter in the kitchen. He's walking around downstairs calling my name. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I heard her stifle a sob. The footsteps were audible through her phone now. Heavy boots on hardwood floors, slow and deliberate. Tyler wasn't in a hurry. He knew she was there, knew she was trapped. "Emma Elizabeth." A male voice sang out, muffled but clear enough to hear the mocking tone. "Come on out, baby. We need to talk about why you've been ignoring me." I updated the units. Suspect inside residence. Then I heard it. Footsteps on stairs. That distinctive creak of someone ascending step by step. "He's coming upstairs," Emma whispered, and I could hear the terror strangling her voice. I pulled up the house layout from county records. 3 bedrooms upstairs, 1 bathroom. Emma's room was at the end of the hall, according to her earlier description. "Emma, I need you to do exactly what I say. Is there anything in the closet you can use to barricade the door?" I kept my voice level, even though adrenaline was flooding my system. 6 minutes until units arrived. The sound of doors opening and closing came through the line. Tyler was checking each room methodically. "Your mom's craft room is looking real nice." His voice drifted through Emma's phone. "Closer now. But that's not where you are, is it?" Emma's breathing was so rapid, I worried she might hyperventilate. There's a dresser, but it's heavy. I can't." A door slammed somewhere in the house, making her gasp. The bedroom door handle rattled. Just a test at first, then more aggressive. "Emma, baby, I know you're in there. I saw your car in the driveway. I've been watching the house for hours, waiting for your parents to leave." The door shook as he threw his weight against it. Bang! The sound was explosive through the phone, and Emma let out a terrified whimper. "Don't make me break another door tonight. You know how much I hate it when you make me angry." I was typing frantically, updating the units. Suspect at bedroom door. Attempting forced entry. Expedite. The response made my stomach turn to ice. Dispatch Unit 2-3 here. Major accident blocking route 47. Having to take alternate route. New ETA. 12 minutes. 12 minutes. I wanted to scream at them to drive faster to go off-road if they had to, but I kept my professional composure. Emma needed me calm. Bang. 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 The door was taking a beating now, and I could hear wood splintering. "Emma, listen to me. Is there a window in your closet?" Sometimes, these old houses had weird architectural features. "No," she stammered. "Just clothes. And wait, there's an attic access panel in the ceiling." My fingers flew to pull up the house blueprints again. Built in 1954, standard Cape Cod style. "Can you reach it?" The banging stopped suddenly, and the silence was somehow worse. Then came Tyler's voice. Different now. Sing, song, and playful in the most terrifying way. "I found your diary, Em, all those pages, about how much you loved me. Remember when you wrote that you'd die without me?" A pause. Funny how things work out. The banging resumed with renewed violence, and this time I heard the distinct crack of wood giving way. The panel, I can't reach it. Emma was crying now, no longer trying to stay quiet. I'm pulling at it, but crash. The bedroom door burst open. I heard Tyler's boots on the carpet, slow and deliberate. There we go. Now, where's my girl hiding? Through the phone, I could hear closet doors being yanked open. First one, then another. Emma had gone completely silent except for her ragged breathing. I muted my end of the line so Tyler wouldn't hear me, but kept talking, hoping she could still draw strength from my voice. "Emma, stay quiet. Officers are almost there. You're going to be okay." But even as I said it, I knew. We all know when we're lying. The sound of hangers scraping on metal filled my headset. He was at her closet. "Found you," Tyler said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Emma screamed. What happened next is burned into my memory like a brand. The phone clattered. She must have dropped it, but the line stayed connected. I heard struggling Emma pleading, "Please, Tyler, don't do this. I'll talk to you." "Okay, we can talk." His response was cold. "Too late for talking. You had your chance. 3 months of chances." There were sounds of a struggle, things falling, breaking. Emma was fighting back. Good girl, I thought desperately. Keep fighting, buy time. Unit suspect has made contact with victim. I transmitted my professional mask, finally cracking. Code 3. Repeat. Code 3. Through the chaos, I heard Emma's voice stronger than I expected. "You're sick, Tyler. That's why I left. You need help." Wrong thing to say. The sounds that followed. I can't adequately describe them. Violence has a particular audio signature when you're helpless on the other end of a phone line. 7 minutes until units arrive. By the time I heard the sirens through Emma's phone, it had been quiet for almost 2 minutes. Not the kind of quiet that means everything's okay. The kind that sits heavy in your chest like wet cement. I stayed on the line talking to no one, saying Emma's name over and over. When the officers finally entered the house, I heard their boots, their shouts of police. "Show yourself." Then finally, one of them must have found the phone because I heard Officer Daniel's familiar voice. "Dispatch, we need EMS now. And notify the coroner." My supervisor had to physically remove the headset from my head. I couldn't let go. In my 7 years as a dispatcher, I'd lost callers before. Heart attacks, where EMS didn't make it in time. Car accidents that were too severe. But I'd never lost someone like this. Someone who was alive and fighting just minutes before. Someone whose last words I heard. Tyler ran, of course, jumped out Emma's bedroom window, and disappeared into the woods behind the house. The manhunt started immediately. State police, helicopters, K-9 units, the works. Emma's parents came home to news vans and crime scene tape instead of their daughter. The media latched onto the story like vultures. Teen girl dies while on phone with 911, 12 minutes too late. A system failure. They played edited portions of my call with Emma, her terrified whispers becoming sound bites for the evening news. Reporters camped outside the dispatch center, shoving microphones at anyone in uniform. The department put me on administrative leave pending investigation. Standard procedure, they said. But it felt like blame. I sat at home watching the coverage, watching them debate response times and budget cuts, and whether we needed more officers on night shift. None of it would bring Emma back. They caught Tyler 3 days later, hiding in his uncle's hunting cabin 2 counties over. He pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. Got life without parole. At the sentencing, Emma's mother looked right at me. I'd been called to testify about the call. I expected hatred in her eyes, blamed for not somehow doing more. Instead, she mouthed, "Thank you," and I broke down completely. She found me after in the courthouse bathroom where I was splashing water on my face. "You stayed with her," she said simply. She wasn't alone. That matters. I returned to work eventually, but nothing was the same. Every call could be another Emma. Every delay could cost a life. I lasted 6 more months before I quit, moved to a different state, took a job in IT, where the worst emergency is a server crash. But on quiet nights, I still hear her voice. Still see that timer counting down minutes we didn't have. Still wonder if there was anything I could have said or done differently. The answer is always no. And that's what haunts me most. The radio static that night had a different quality to it. Sharper, almost metallic. The 18th of November, 2021, and I was 3 hours into my dispatch shift at the Sheriff's Department in rural Wyoming. My name's Carla, and I'd been handling overnight dispatch for about 4 years at that point. The job mostly involved monitoring our deputies on patrol, taking the occasional call about loose cattle or domestic disputes, and trying to stay awake through the long stretches of nothing. We ran a skeleton crew after dark, just 3 deputies covering nearly 800 square miles of wilderness, ranch land, and the occasional cluster of houses that passed for neighborhoods out here. Deputy Jason Holloway had drawn the eastern sector that Thursday, which meant he'd be driving the long loops around Elk Ridge Wildlife Reserve. Jason was one of our newer guys, only been with us 2 years, but he'd proven himself solid and dependable. The first few hours passed without incident. Jason checked in every 30 minutes like clockwork. Unit 2-3. All clear at mile marker 47. That sort of thing. Around 11:40 p.m., he radioed that he was heading up Forest Service Road 92 to check on some campers who'd been reported earlier in the week. The reserve technically closed at sunset, but people sometimes ignored the signs, especially during hunting season. I logged his location and went back to my crossword puzzle. The next check-in would be at 12:10 a.m. Except 12:10 came and went without a word from Jason. At 12:15, I tried raising him on the radio. Unit 2-3. This is dispatch. Please report your status. Nothing but that strange, sharp static. I tried twice more before alerting Sergeant Coleman, who was patrolling the western sector. Policy said we'd wait until 12:30 before initiating search protocols. But something about the quality of that silence made my skin prickle. At 12:28 a.m., just as I was about to officially call it in, Jason's voice burst through the radio, but it wasn't his usual, calm, professional tone. He was breathing hard, almost panting. Dispatch, Unit 2-3, there's someone out here on foot, middle of the road. His voice crackled and broke up. They're just standing there, not moving. I grabbed my headset and leaned forward. Unit 2-3, can you describe the individual? Do they appear to be in distress? The response came after a long pause. Negative on description. They're about 50 yards ahead. Can't make out features. They're wearing something dark, maybe a coat. Standing completely still. I could hear Jason's engine idling in the background and something else. A low humming that seemed to pulse through the static. Should I approach? He asked. and for the first time in 2 years, I heard uncertainty in his voice. Before I could respond, Jason spoke again, his words coming faster now. "They're moving, walking toward my vehicle. Dispatch. Something's not right here. The way they're moving, it's..." The transmission cut to static, then came back like they're gliding, not walking, gliding. I immediately radioed Coleman to head to Forest Service Road 92, then focused on Jason. "Unit 2, 3, maintain distance. Do not exit your vehicle. Back up en route." But Jason wasn't listening anymore. I could hear his door chime. He was getting out. "Sir, ma'am, Sheriff's Department, are you all right?" His voice grew distant as he moved away from the radio. The body cam footage would later show what happened next, though I only had audio at the time. Footsteps on gravel, heavy breathing, then Jason's voice, barely a whisper. "That's not. You're not." A sound followed that I'll never forget, like wind chimes made of bone, tinkling in a breeze that shouldn't exist. The radio erupted in a burst of noise. Jason screaming, not in fear, but in pure confusion, like someone trying to process something impossible. The face is wrong. Then nothing. Complete silence, not even static. I slammed my palm on the transmission button. "Unit 2-3. Jason, respond immediately." My voice cracked as I repeated the call over and over. Coleman radioed that he was 15 minutes out, pushing his cruiser hard on those winding mountain roads. I alerted Sheriff Morrison and initiated a full emergency response. Every available unit, volunteer firefighters, even some off-duty officers who lived nearby, everyone converged on Forest Service Road 92. Those 15 minutes waiting for Coleman to arrive stretched like hours. I kept trying to raise Jason, switching between professional protocol and desperate pleading. "Jason, if you can hear this, just key your mic. Just let us know you're alive." Coleman arrived at Jason's last known position at 12:51 a.m. His voice came through tight with worry. "Dispatch, I've located Unit 2-3. Vehicle is running. Driver door open. Lights on. No sign of deputy hallway." I could hear him moving around the scene. His sidearm is on the ground beside the vehicle. Magazine full. Doesn't appear to have been fired. Radio handset is hanging outside the door. More footsteps quicker now. There's Carla. There's marks in the gravel like something was dragged. But they just stopped about 20 foot from the vehicle. Just stopped dead. The sound of Coleman's breathing filled my headset as he followed the drag marks. His badge is here, and his boot. Just one boot left foot. The sheriff arrived 10 minutes later with 3 more units. They set up a perimeter and began a systematic search, but the forest seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. The darkness beyond the road felt hungry, alive in a way that made no sense. The search continued through the night. Dogs were brought in at first light, but they refused to follow any trail past where the drag marks ended. They'd approach that spot, then back away, whimpering, tails tucked between their legs. The handler, a veteran named Bill Hutchinson, who'd worked search and rescue for 20 years, said he'd never seen his dogs act that way. Around 7 a.m., Deputy Melissa Thorne found Jason's other boot nearly a quarter mile into the forest, placed neatly at the base of a pine tree, like someone had set it there deliberately. His duty belt was discovered an hour later, hung precisely over a branch 15 foot off the ground. No one could explain how it got there. The tree trunk was smooth, no low branches to climb. Each item we found was clean, undamaged, arranged with an unsettling care that made my stomach churn. The body cam footage, when we finally reviewed it, only deepened the mystery. The video started normal enough. Jason driving down the dark forest road, headlights cutting through the darkness. At 11:58 p.m., a figure appeared in the distance, exactly as he'd described, standing motionless in the middle of the road. The image quality was grainy, but you could make out a tall, thin silhouette wrapped in what looked like a long, dark coat. As Jason's cruiser approached, the figure didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. Then it began walking toward the vehicle with that horrible gliding motion Jason had described, feet never quite seeming to touch the ground properly. Jason got out, called to the figure. The camera showed him walking forward, hand resting on his sidearm, but not drawing it. The figure stopped about 10 foot away. For 3 seconds, they stood facing each other. Then the figure lifted its head, and the camera caught a glimpse of its face. The footage corrupted at that exact moment, not damaged or deleted, but corrupted in a way our tech specialist said he'd never seen before. Pixels arranged themselves into patterns that hurt to perceive geometries that shouldn't exist in a two-dimensional image. The search expanded over the following days. State police, FBI, volunteers from 3 counties, hundreds of people combing through the Elk Ridge Reserve. We found more of Jason's belongings scattered throughout the forest, each placed with that same deliberate care. His wallet tucked inside a hollow log, bills and cards neatly arranged, his wedding ring balanced on top of a rock formation that would have required technical climbing gear to reach. His uniform shirt cleaned and pressed, as if fresh from the dry cleaner, draped over a bush deep in a ravine. But never Jason himself. Never any blood, any signs of struggle beyond those initial drag marks. On the 4th night of searching, I was back at dispatch when Coleman radioed in from Forest Service Road, 92. He was doing a routine check of the scene, something we'd been doing every few hours. His voice came through shaky. "Carla, you're not going to believe this. There's someone standing in the exact spot where we found Jason's cruiser. Same position, same posture, just standing there." My fingers fumbled for the radio. "Can you identify them? Is it Jason?" Coleman's cruiser camera was recording as he approached, headlights illuminating the figure. "Negative. I don't know what this is. They're wearing Jason's uniform." "But Carla, we have Jason's uniform in evidence." I logged it myself. I pulled up the evidence log. He was right. Every piece of Jason's uniform was accounted for. "Coleman, do not approach. Wait for backup." But he was already getting out, already walking toward the figure. I could hear his footsteps, his breathing getting heavier. "Sir, I need you to turn around slowly and keep your hands where I can see them." The figure didn't move. Coleman got closer. "Sir, I'm talking to you. Turn around now." Still nothing. Coleman was maybe 5 feet away when he stopped. Suddenly, a gasp escaped him. The face. There's no face. It's just smooth, like skin stretched over a mannequin. Then Coleman screamed, a sound of pure primal terror that sent ice through my veins. The radio cut to static. When backup arrived 8 minutes later, they found Coleman's cruiser empty, engine running, doors locked from the inside. His body cam showed nothing but that same impossible corruption. After Coleman vanished, the FBI took over the case completely. They brought in specialists, people who dealt with unusual circumstances. Their words, not mine. The Forest Service Road was closed indefinitely. The search was called off after 2 weeks with no trace of either deputy found. But that wasn't the end. That was just the beginning of something worse. A month later, Deputy Thorne was patrolling near the reserve when she heard crying over her radio, not through dispatch, but bleeding through the static on a channel that shouldn't exist. She recorded it on her phone, played it for me later. It was Jason's voice, clear as day, calling for help, saying he was lost, that they wouldn't let him leave. The recording lasted 43 seconds before dissolving into that bone chime sound. 3 months after that, a hiker reported seeing 2 sheriff's deputies standing motionless in the forest about a mile from the road. Said they were facing each other, perfectly still, like they were frozen mid-con conversation. By the time rangers investigated, nothing was there but 2 sets of boot prints that started and stopped without explanation. I quit the department 6 months after that night. Couldn't handle the radio anymore. Every burst of static sounded like Jason trying to break through. The new dispatcher, a young guy named Kevin, lasted 3 weeks before he reported hearing voices in the static, too. Not just Jason and Coleman, but others. Older voices, deputies from the 72nd, 82nd, all of them lost on patrol near Elk Ridge. The department doesn't send solo units to that sector anymore. They've had too many close calls. Deputies reporting figures on the road, equipment malfunctioning, radios picking up impossible transmissions. The official report lists Jason and Coleman as missing. Cases still open, but inactive. Their families held memorial services with empty caskets. But I know they're not dead. Not exactly. Sometimes, on clear nights when the static is just right, You can still hear them out there calling for backup that will never come, warning about the figure on the road, screaming about the face that isn't a face. The Forest Service has proposals to expand the reserve, make it bigger. I pray they don't. Some boundaries shouldn't be pushed. Some places should be left alone. And whatever's out there in Elk Ridge, wearing the faces and uniforms of our missing deputies, it's still hungry, still waiting on Forest Service Road 92 for the next solo patrol to come driving through the dark. The night shift at Riverside Police Dispatch usually meant coffee, crossword puzzles, and the occasional drunk driver report. 3 years into the job, I'd heard every excuse, every sob story, every bizarre complaint imaginable. That changed on a humid Thursday in early September 2022, when the 911 system lit up with a call from 8247 Willow Street at 11:47 p.m., 2 seconds of dead air, then nothing. The address pulled up as a condemned duplex that had been sitting empty since a kitchen fire tore through the east side 18 months earlier. The place should have been demolished already, but budget cuts kept pushing it back. I logged the hang-up and went back to my lukewarm coffee, figuring some kid had found a way inside and was messing around with an old landline that somehow still had juice. 20 minutes later, another call. Same address, same pattern, brief silence, then disconnection. The hairs on my neck started to prickle. In my experience, repeat hang-ups from abandoned buildings usually meant one of 3 things: faulty wiring, someone in genuine trouble who couldn't speak, or somebody trying to lure officers into an ambush. Protocol demanded we send a unit to check after 2 calls from the same location. I radioed officers Bradley and Martinez who were doing their rounds near the industrial district. Bradley's voice crackled through casual and unbothered. They'd swing by, probably find some teenagers drinking stolen beer or a homeless person who'd pried open a window. Routine stuff. But something in my gut kept twisting the way it does when a storm's coming and the air pressure drops. I pulled up the property records while they drove. The duplex had been owned by a dental practice that went bankrupt, then seized by the city for back taxes. Bradley's body cam footage started streaming to my monitor at 12:14 a.m. The duplex looked worse than the photos in our system. Peeling yellow paint, plywood over most windows, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete steps. The fire damage on the east side had left black streaks up the exterior wall like claw marks. Martinez circled around back while Bradley approached the front door, which hung slightly ajar. That detail made my spine go rigid. City maintenance always sealed these properties tight after condemning them. Bradley pushed the door open with his boot, flashlight cutting through the darkness inside. The smell hit him immediately. I could tell by how his head jerked back. Mold, smoke damage, and something else he couldn't identify. The living room had been stripped down to bare walls and exposed wiring, but fresh footprints tracked through the dust on the floor, multiple sets, different shoe sizes. The third call came through while Bradley was still in the doorway. This time, I heard breathing before the line went dead. Ragged, almost panting. I tried to trace the exact origin within the building, but the old phone system only gave me the main address. Martinez's radio crackled. He'd found a basement window that had been recently pried open, the metal frame bent outward like someone had used a crowbar, fresh scratches in the rust. Bradley decided to clear the first floor before they investigated the basement. Moving through what used to be a kitchen, the cabinets were gone, sold off or stolen, leaving ghostly outlines on the walls. But in the corner, barely visible in the flashlight beam, sat a new addition. A camping cooler, the expensive kind with a tight seal. The red plastic looked alien against all that decay. Bradley popped it open and found ice packs still partially frozen, surrounding glass vials filled with clear liquid and syringes wrapped in plastic. That's when they heard the humming, low and rhythmic, coming from somewhere below. Not quite a song, more like a chant without words. Bradley and Martinez exchanged glances through the body cam feed. I could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they gripped their weapons a little tighter. They made their way to the basement door, which had been painted over so many times the layers created ridges like tree bark. Fresh marks scored the paint near the handle, as if someone had been clawing at it. The humming grew louder as Bradley eased the door open. The wooden stairs groaned under his weight, each step echoing in the darkness below. Martinez followed, covering him. The basement stretched longer than it should have, extending under both sides of the duplex. Emergency work lights, the kind construction crews use, had been strung along the ceiling with orange extension cords snaking back to a portable generator humming in the corner. What they found down there still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. The basement had been transformed into something between a medical facility and a church. Folding tables lined the walls covered with notebooks, medical supplies, and printed photographs of young people. Teenagers mostly, some barely looking 13. Red twine connected the photos like a spider web, with notes scribbled on index cards at each intersection. But the center of the room stopped them cold. 7 people sat in a circle on cushions, heads bowed, that eerie humming flowing from their throats in perfect unison. In the middle of their circle, a girl who couldn't have been older than 16 lay motionless on a camping mat. Her eyes were open but unfocused, pupils dilated to black pools. Strange symbols had been drawn on her arms with what looked like permanent marker. Not satanic stuff, but geometric patterns that seemed to shift in the work light's harsh glare. An IV drip ran into her left arm, the bag hanging from a music stand someone had repurposed. Bradley announced police presence, his voice booming in the confined space. The humming stopped instantly, like someone had yanked a plug from a socket. 7 heads turned in perfect synchronization, and that's when I saw their faces clearly on the body cam. They weren't what I expected. No wild hair or crazed expressions. These people looked normal, almost professional. 3 women and 4 men, ages ranging from maybe 25 to 50, dressed in clean, casual clothes like they just come from an office job. The oldest man, gay-haired with wire, rimmed glasses, smiled at the officers with the practiced warmth of a pediatrician. He introduced himself as Dr. Harold Vance, speaking in a voice smooth as melted butter. He explained they were conducting a therapeutic intervention, helping troubled youth process trauma through guided meditation. He had credentials, he assured them, gesturing to a briefcase near the wall. The girl on the mat was named Stephanie, a willing participant who'd been living on the streets before they took her in. Something about his voice made my teeth ache. Too calm, too rehearsed. Bradley asked about the IV drip, and Dr. Vance explained it was a harmless saline solution with vitamins keeping the participants hydrated during their extended sessions. But Martinez had circled behind the group, and his flashlight caught something the doctor hadn't mentioned. 3 more mats rolled up in the corner, each with a pillow and IV stand waiting. The other circle members remained perfectly still, hands folded in their laps, eyes tracking the officers with an intensity that felt wrong. One woman, maybe 30, with strawberry blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, kept tilting her head at odd angles like she was listening to something only she could hear. Through the radio, I heard more voices from upstairs. Bradley called for backup while Martinez checked on the girl. Her pulse was steady but slow, and when he shined his light in her eyes, she didn't even blink. The track marks on her arms weren't just from the current IV. Older puncture wounds dotted her skin like constellations. The 4th 911 call came through then, and this time I heard a voice. Young male whispering, "Please, they won't let us leave." The line stayed open for 8 seconds before cutting off. I immediately patched this information to Bradley, watching his posture change on the camera feed. Dr. Vance's smile never wavered, but something shifted in the room's atmosphere. The circle members began to stand up slowly, too slowly, like they were moving underwater. That's when I noticed their eyes. All of them had the same dilated pupils as the girl on the mat. Bradley ordered everyone to remain seated, but they kept rising, forming a tighter circle around the officers. The woman with the strawberry blonde hair started humming again, a different tune this time, and the others joined in one by one. The sound made the body cam audio crackle with static. Martinez tried to radio for that backup, but his words came through garbled, like the signal was being jammed. Dr. Vance reached into his pocket and both officers drew their weapons, but he only pulled out an old flip phone, holding it up like a peace offering. "The children call when they're ready for the next phase," he explained, his voice still maddeningly calm. "They're upstairs completing their personal inventories. Would you like to meet them?" Bradley ordered him to drop the phone and get on the ground. But the doctor just kept talking, explaining how they'd been helping runaways for 13 months, giving them purpose, teaching them to shed their past traumas through chemical assistance and guided reconstruction. The symbols on their arms were maps, he said, showing the pathways from their old selves to their new identities. Behind him, one of the younger men in the circle pulled out a notebook and began sketching frantically, his hand moving across the page in sharp mechanical movements. Even from the body cam footage, I could see he was drawing floor plans of the police station. The backup units arrived just as things went sideways. 4 more officers thundered down the stairs, and the circle members scattered like roaches when you flip on a light. But they didn't run randomly. They moved with purpose, each taking a predetermined route. 2 went for the notebooks on the tables, shoving papers into their mouths and chewing frantically. Another grabbed the IV bags, puncturing them with a pocket keck knife so the contents spilled across the concrete floor. The strawberry blonde woman dove for the girl on the mat, trying to drag her toward a door I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a tall filing cabinet. Dr. Vance stood perfectly still in the chaos, hands raised, still wearing that horrible smile. "You're interrupting crucial work," he said as Bradley cuffed him. "These children came to us broken. We're simply helping them become whole again." Martinez and another officer secured the girl, who was starting to mumble incoherently about doorways and numbers that didn't add up right. They found 12 more kids upstairs, all between 14 and 19, sitting in separate rooms throughout the duplex. Each one had those same geometric symbols drawn on their skin, each one in various stages of whatever process this group had been putting them through. Some were alert but confused, asking when their next session would be. Others barely responded to their own names. The worst part was the journals they found. Hundreds of pages where these kids had been made to write out their entire life stories over and over, each version slightly different until they couldn't remember which parts were real. The whole operation unraveled over the next few weeks. Dr. Vance turned out to be a former psychiatrist who'd lost his license in 2018 for experimenting with memory suppression techniques. The others were a mix of former patients and true believers he'd gathered through online forums about therapeutic reformation. They'd been taking runaways and homeless teens, kids who wouldn't be missed immediately, and putting them through this systematic breakdown of identity. The drugs in those vials were a cocktail of dissociatives and hallucinogens, carefully measured to make the subject suggestible without causing permanent physical damage. All those 911 calls had been from kids in the upstairs rooms, fighting through their chemical fog to reach the phones the group used to monitor their progress. We saved 17 kids total from that duplex, though some took months to fully recover their sense of self. The building was demolished 2 months later, but sometimes on quiet nights at dispatch, I still jump when a hang-up call comes through. Vincent Torres had been my partner for 8 months when everything changed that Friday night in August 2018. He was one of those seasoned cops who'd seen every type of call imaginable during his 22 years on the Clearwater Heights force. Domestic disputes, drug busts, armed robberies, you name it. At 51, he had this calm demeanor that came from experience, never rattled by the chaos that usually sent rookies like me into a panic. We'd been patrolling the quiet suburban streets since 1000 p.m., the kind of neighborhood where the biggest excitement was usually someone's sprinkler system malfunctioning or a raccoon getting into garbage cans. The radio had been relatively quiet that night, just a few noise complaints, and one drunk driver we'd pulled over around midnight. Vincent always insisted on driving past the old Restwood Cemetery during our rounds, claiming it was a magnet for trouble despite its peaceful appearance during daylight hours. The cemetery stretched along the entire eastern border of the Maple Grove subdivision, its row-iron gates often left unlocked by the careless groundskeeper. Dating back to the 1802nd, it housed generations of Clearwater Heights residents in elaborate Victorian monuments and weathered family plots that the city barely maintained anymore. Most locals avoided the area after dark, not out of superstition, but because it attracted homeless camps and teenagers drinking stolen beer among the headstones. Vincent had arrested more kids there than anywhere else on our beat. The street lamps cast an eerie glow across the cemetery entrance, creating long shadows that danced between the old oak trees. As we approached the gates around 2:30 a.m., Vincent slowed our patrol car to his usual crawling pace, scanning the grounds for any signs of trespassers. That's when we both saw her, a small figure standing motionless between two tall granite headstones, barely visible in the dim light filtering through the cemetery's ancient trees. "Jesus Christ," Vincent whispered, immediately pulling the car to a stop and grabbing his flashlight. The child appeared to be around 7 or 8 years old, wearing what looked like a pale night gown that seemed to glow against the darkness. Her long, dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she stood completely still, as if she were part of the cemetery itself. Vincent and I exchanged glances. Finding a child alone in a graveyard at nearly 3 a.m. wasn't just unusual, it was deeply disturbing. My training kicked in as I radioed dispatch to report a possible missing child, while Vincent stepped out of the car with his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. The little girl didn't move, didn't acknowledge our presence, just continued staring straight ahead at something we couldn't see. Her bare feet were clearly visible against the dark grass, and I wondered how long she'd been standing there in the August heat. As Vincent approached the cemetery gates, calling out gentle reassurances, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The child's nightgown wasn't just pale, it was filthy, stained with what looked like mud and grass, as if she'd been wandering for hours. Her posture was rigid, unnatural, like a statue placed among the headstones. Vincent kept his voice calm and friendly, asking her name if she was hurt, where her parents were, the standard questions we'd been trained to ask in situations involving minors. But the girl never responded, never even turned her head in our direction. She just stood there perfectly still, her small frame silhouetted against the moonlight filtering through the oak branches. The entire scene felt wrong, in a way I couldn't articulate, like we'd stumbled into something that violated the natural order of things. Vincent gestured for me to circle around the other side of the cemetery fence, thinking maybe we could approach her from both directions without startling her. I grabbed my own flashlight and jogged around the perimeter, my boots crunching on the gravel path that bordered the cemetery. The girl remained motionless as I positioned myself about 20 foot from her other side, close enough to see her more clearly, but far enough to avoid seeming threatening. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the moonlight, and her eyes were wide open, staring at something beyond the headstones. What struck me most was how perfectly still she was. Not the fidgety stillness of a scared child, but an absolute statue-like immobility that seemed impossible for someone her age. Vincent was now inside the cemetery grounds, speaking in the gentle tone he usually reserved for domestic violence victims. He asked her about her family, if she lived nearby, if someone had hurt her. The girl's lips never moved, never even twitched. Her breathing was so shallow, I couldn't tell if she was breathing at all. The nightgown she wore was torn at the hem, revealing more dirt and what looked like small scratches on her legs. Vincent took another step closer, his flashlight beam carefully pointed at the ground to avoid blinding her. That's when I noticed the strangest detail of all. Despite standing on damp grass for what must have been hours, the soles of her bare feet were completely clean. No mud, no grass stains, nothing that would indicate she'd walked through a cemetery in the middle of the night. Vincent was now only about 10 foot away from her, close enough to reach out and touch her shoulder if needed. He knelt down to her eye level, his voice taking on that fatherly tone he used with his own grandchildren. The girl finally moved, but not in any way we expected. Instead of turning toward Vincent or acknowledging his presence, she simply pivoted 90 degrees to her left, as if she were on a turntable, and began walking deeper into the cemetery. Her movement was fluid, eerily graceful, but completely silent. No footsteps, no rustling of fabric, nothing. Vincent called out for her to stop, but she continued walking between the headstones, her white nightgown becoming harder to see as she moved away from the streetlights. Both Vincent and I followed her path, our flashlights cutting through the darkness as we tried to keep her in sight. The cemetery was larger than it appeared from the street, with winding paths that led deeper into sections dating back over a century. Ancient mausoleums and towering monuments created a maze of shadows, and the girl seemed to know exactly where she was going. She walked with purpose, never hesitating at intersections or stumbling over the uneven ground, that made Vincent and me move carefully with each step. We called out to her repeatedly, identifying ourselves as police officers, promising we just wanted to help her get home safely. She never responded, never turned around, just continued her silent journey deeper into the cemetery. After about 5 minutes of following her, weaving between elaborate headstones and memorial benches, I realized we were approaching the oldest section of Restwood. The graves here were from the 1802nd, many of them unmarked or with inscriptions too weathered to read. The girl stopped abruptly next to a large granite angel statue, its wings spread wide and face turned skyward. For a moment, she stood there just as she had when we first spotted her, completely motionless, staring straight ahead. Vincent and I were about 15 foot away, both of us breathing hard from the pursuit through the uneven terrain. The girl's nightgown seemed to shimmer in our flashlight beams, and I could see that her hair was longer than I'd initially thought, reaching almost to her waist. Vincent tried one more time to get her attention, his voice gentle but urgent. He explained that we were worried about her safety, that her parents were probably scared, that we just wanted to help her get home. The girl turned her head slightly, just enough that we could see her profile in the dim light. Her face was serene, almost peaceful, but her eyes were completely black in the darkness. Then, without any warning or gradual movement, she simply wasn't there anymore. 1 second, she was standing next to the angel statue. The next second, the space was empty. Vincent and I both rushed forward, searching frantically with our flashlights, but found nothing except undisturbed grass and the cold granite of the memorial. We spent the next 2 hours combing through every section of that cemetery, calling for backup and bringing in additional officers with high-powered searchlights. The entire area was sealed off while we methodically checked behind every headstone, inside every mausoleum, and around every memorial structure large enough to hide a child. Vincent even had the groundskeeper unlock the maintenance shed and storage areas, thinking maybe she'd hidden there. Nothing. It was as if the girl had never existed at all. The strangest part was that our footprints were clearly visible in the soft earth around the angel statue, but there were no small footprints anywhere nearby. The grass where she'd been standing wasn't even disturbed. No indication that anyone had been there at all. By dawn, we had search dogs brought in, and they found no trace of human scent beyond what Vincent and I had left behind. The whole situation made no sense, and I could see the frustration and confusion growing in Vincent's weathered face as the hours passed without answers. Captain Morris arrived around 6 a.m., demanding a full explanation for why half the night shift was searching a cemetery for a missing child with no missing person report. Vincent and I gave our statements separately, both describing the same impossible encounter. The captain listened with the kind of skeptical expression reserved for officers who'd been on the job too long and were starting to see things. But then the security footage arrived from the municipal building across the street, and everything became even more disturbing. The timestamp showed our patrol car stopping at 2:47 a.m., showed Vincent and me getting out, showed us following something through the cemetery with our flashlights, but the cameras never captured any child. The footage clearly showed us talking to empty air, following nothing, searching for someone who wasn't there. Captain Morris played the recording 3 times, and each viewing made my chest tighten with a sick feeling I couldn't shake. Either Vincent and I had suffered some kind of shared hallucination, or we'd encountered something that didn't register on electronic surveillance equipment. The investigation took an unexpected turn 3 days later when Officer Amanda Chen discovered something during a routine patrol of the area. About a 4-mile from the cemetery, hidden in a dense grove of trees that bordered an abandoned lot, she found a makeshift homeless camp. The shelter was crude but well established. A large tarp stretched between several trees, creating a living space that had obviously been used for months. Inside, Amanda found sleeping bags, camping equipment, and several plastic bags filled with children's clothing. The clothes were all for a girl around 7 or 8 years old: small dresses, underwear, socks, and a white cotton nightgown that was identical to what Vincent and I had described. There were also toys scattered throughout the camp: a worn stuffed rabbit, several picture books, and a small music box that played a haunting lullaby when opened. What made the discovery even more unsettling was that none of the clothing matched any missing person reports from the past 5 years. The tags were still attached to some items, suggesting they'd been recently purchased rather than belongings of an actual missing child. Captain Morris had the entire camp processed as a crime scene, but the homeless woman who'd been living there was nowhere to be found. Neighbors in the area reported seeing an elderly woman with long gray hair occasionally walking through the neighborhood, sometimes carrying shopping bags or pushing a grocery cart full of belongings. She never spoke to anyone, never caused trouble, just existed on the margins of the community like so many others. The camp showed signs of recent abandonment, food that was only a few days old, a campfire that had been extinguished but still smelled of smoke. It was as if she'd vanished right around the time Vincent and I had our encounter with the child. We never found the woman, never got any answers about the children's clothes or toys, and never saw the girl again. The case was eventually filed away as unexplained, but Vincent retired early that winter, claiming he couldn't patrol those streets anymore without thinking about that night. 5 years later, I still drive past Restwood Cemetery during my shifts, and sometimes I slow down near those old headstones, wondering if I'll see her again. That silent child who appeared and disappeared like morning mist, leaving behind only questions and the memory of something that shouldn't have existed. The gas station off Route 117 was one of those places that barely changed with time. Same flickering sign, same squeaky glass door, same burnt coffee smell every time you stepped inside. I wasn't assigned to that part of town often, but I knew it well enough. A few locals stopped in for smokes or lottery tickets on their morning commute, and the guy who worked overnights, Greg, I think his name was, always left the place spotless by the time the day shift rolled in. That morning, though, something didn't sit right with the call we got just after 6 a.m. A customer said the station lights were on, the door was unlocked, but no one was inside. He'd waited a good 10 minutes before calling it in. When I pulled up, there was a single car in the lot, not running. The front door stood slightly open. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed like usual, and the radio behind the counter was playing classic rock, too loud for a place with no one in it. I announced myself as I stepped in. Standard protocol, no answer. The register drawer was wide open, but there wasn't any obvious sign of theft. Greg's windbreaker was draped over the chair behind the counter, and there was a half-empty bottle of Mountain Dew beside it, condensation still on the plastic. I checked the bathrooms, the supply closet, even the walk-in fridge. Nothing. It was like he'd just gotten up in the middle of a shift and vanished. I radioed in and started reviewing the security footage from the office in the back. The cameras covered most of the interior aisles, the counter, front door, but just barely missed the back exit. Around 2:40 a.m., Greg is seen walking to the front door and turning the lock. He stands there talking to someone just outside the frame. His posture is casual at first, one hand on his hip, the other gesturing. Then the footage skips. Not a glitch. I mean, it cuts completely. No signal for exactly 17 minutes. When it picks back up, the store is dead empty. No Greg. No sign of whoever was outside. But the mop buckets tipped over near the back exit, with a wet trail leading halfway across the floor. I requested a copy of the footage and contacted the gas station's owner. That's when I found out they'd had a break-in just a few days before. Nothing was taken except for the DVR hard drive, the same one that had been replaced shortly before Greg's shift. Whoever had tampered with it knew exactly what they were after. We checked the logs, and it turned out no gas had been pumped after 2:40 a.m., and no purchases were recorded. We interviewed the last 3 customers who'd been in that night. None of them saw anything weird. One of them mentioned Greg looked a little distracted, but nothing more than that. No raised voices, no arguments, no threats. By the end of that week, we'd followed up on every lead we had. Friends, family, old co-workers. Greg had no enemies, no known disputes, no signs of stress or trouble in his life. He rented a studio apartment about 10 minutes from the station, lived alone, paid his bills on time, no criminal record. His manager said he was always early for shifts, never missed a day. The weirdest part, his phone was found in the back room of the station, plugged into the wall as if he meant to come back for it. I went over everything again. The mop bucket, the door lock, the silence in that footage. It didn't feel like a robbery, and it didn't feel random. It felt precise. The following Monday, I drove back out there just to walk through it again, off the clock. I don't usually do that, but something about that place lingered in my head. The way the register drawer was left open, but untouched. The trail of dirty water drying near the rear exit. I tried to picture Greg's routine, locking the front, maybe hearing a knock, thinking it was someone he knew. But then what? There were no drag marks, no overturned shelves, not even a scuff on the tile. And yet, he was gone. Like a hole had quietly opened up under his feet and swallowed him whole. 2 weeks later, I got called to a completely different location, another gas station across the county. This one was newer, part of a chain. The call was nearly identical. Early customer shows up. Lights are on. Doors unlocked. No sign of the clerk. Her name was Rebecca Tr. 27. Part-time night worker. In school during the day, same situation. Register open. Phone still charging behind the counter. Fresh cup of coffee left half full. And again, the security footage was useless. Cameras lost feed at 2:37 a.m. for exactly 16 minutes. When it came back, the store was quiet, empty, and the mop was knocked over in the supply closet. I drove straight back to the first location that night. I sat in my cruiser in the parking lot just watching. I don't know what I expected to see. Something about the silence of that place at night felt unnatural, like it was waiting for something. There's a kind of stillness that settles in when you're alone in an open space under harsh lights, where even the hum of the bulbs starts to feel accusatory. I kept thinking about the missing footage, not corrupted, removed deliberately. Whoever did this didn't just want the person gone. They didn't want the moment of it to exist at all. We pulled every camera feed from neighboring businesses both times, hoping for a glimpse of whoever Greg or Rebecca had spoken to. Nothing. Either the person never crossed a lens or knew exactly how to avoid being seen. One of our techs pointed out that in both cases, the cameras cut around the same time down to the minute, and both systems had been recently serviced by the same third-party contractor. We dug into it, but the name was fake, the phone disconnected, and the service logs looked like they'd been tampered with after the fact. The addresses used on the forms traced back to a strip mall that had been demolished over a year ago. It felt like we were chasing smoke. I tried contacting Rebecca's parents. Her mom said she'd gotten a call from Rebecca's number the night before she vanished. Just static and faint clicks on the line. She thought it was a butt dial, but now that she thought about it, she said there was something rhythmic in the static. Not like interference, more like breathing. I couldn't tell her what to make of that. I didn't know myself. At some point, it stopped feeling like a missing persons case and started feeling like a message. The problem was, I didn't know who it was meant for or if it was still unfolding. A month after Rebecca disappeared, both gas stations quietly closed. Corporate cited security concerns, but never gave a public statement. The night shifts were never filled again. I still drive past the one on Route 117 sometimes. The sign's still there, unlit, and the pumps are wrapped in yellow tape, sun-faded and fluttering in the wind. Every time I pass it, I can still picture Greg standing behind the counter, counting scratch-offs and talking to some shadow just out of view. And I always wonder what happened in those missing minutes. What he saw. What he heard. What made him walk away from everything without a trace. They moved me to traffic details 6 months later. I didn't fight it. These days, I avoid convenience stores altogether when I'm on patrol after midnight. Not out of fear exactly, just a sense that some places stop being places after a while. They become traps wearing the shape of routine, and once you step inside at the wrong moment, say 2:40 the morning, it's not always guaranteed you'll come back out. Music. Let me start by saying I'm a park ranger at Blackwood Forest Preserve in northern Michigan. And what happened to me last March still gives me nightmares. I'd been working the night shift for about 3 years by then, mostly dealing with teenagers, partying, or the occasional lost hiker. At 34, I thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me. The preserve covers nearly 8,000 acres of dense pine and oak with hiking trails that snake through valleys most people never bother exploring. I lived alone in a small cabin just outside the park boundaries, divorced for 2 years, and honestly enjoying the solitude. My routine was simple. patrol the main trails, check the camping areas, and make sure the gates were locked by midnight. It was peaceful work, exactly what I needed after my messy breakup with my ex-wife, Lisa. That particular Friday night started like any other. I grabbed a coffee from the gas station on Route 47 and was making my usual rounds when my radio crackled to life around 11:30 p.m. The dispatcher, Nancy, sounded unusually tense as she relayed a call from two hikers who'd been camping near the South Ridge. They reported hearing children crying somewhere deep in the forest beyond the marked trails. The sound had been going on for over an hour, they said, and it was getting closer to their campsite. When I asked Nancy for more details, she mentioned the hikers seemed genuinely scared. Not the usual drunk college kids making prank calls. These were experienced outdoorsmen, a father and son from Grand Rapids who'd been camping in our preserve for years. They knew the difference between animal sounds and human voices, and they were absolutely certain they were hearing children in distress. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the South Ridge, my boots crunching through the frost-covered leaves. The temperature had dropped to about 28 degrees, and my breath formed small clouds in the beam of my light. As I got closer to the camper's location, I could hear it too. A faint, high-pitched wailing that seemed to drift through the trees like smoke. It wasn't constant, but came in waves, sometimes sounding like multiple voices overlapping. The sound made my skin crawl in a way I'd never experienced before. I've heard plenty of strange noises in the woods over the years. Owls, coyotes, even the occasional mountain lion passing through. But this was different. This sounded unmistakably human, unmistakably young, and unmistakably terrified. What made it even more unsettling was how it seemed to move, first coming from the east, then shifting to the north, as if whoever was making the noise was wandering aimlessly through the darkness. When I reached the hiker's campsite, I found Tom and his 6-year-old son, Jake, huddled by their fire, both looking pale and shaken. Tom, a burly guy in his 52nd with calloused hands and a graying beard, was someone I'd chatted with many times over the years. He was the type who'd help you change a flat tire in the rain and never complain about getting dirty. But that night, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Jake kept glancing toward the tree, his young face tight with anxiety. They told me the crying had started around 9 p.m., just as they were settling in for the night. At first, they thought it might be someone playing a prank, but as the hours passed and the sounds continued, they realized something was seriously wrong. Tom had even tried walking toward the noise with his own flashlight, but every time he got close, the crying would stop completely, only to resume from a different direction minutes later. They'd called 911 because they were worried someone might be hurt or lost, but they were also genuinely frightened by how unnatural the whole situation felt. I decided to investigate further, telling Tom and Jake to stay put while I ventured into the woods. The crying had gone quiet for about 10 minutes, but I could still feel an oppressive weight in the air, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I followed what looked like a deer path heading northeast, deeper into the preserve than most visitors ever went. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating twisted branches and shadows that seemed to dance just beyond my vision. After walking for maybe 20 minutes, I stumbled upon something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There, carved into the bark of a massive oak tree, were crude drawings that looked like they'd been made with a knife or sharp rock. They showed stick figures of adults and children, but the children were always separated from the adults, sometimes with lines drawn between them like barriers. Some of the drawings had what appeared to be tears coming from the stick figures' eyes. The carvings were fresh. I could still see sap bleeding from the cuts. As I examined the tree more closely, I noticed other markings scattered throughout the area. On a birch tree about 30 feet away, someone had scratched the words "Come play" in uneven letters. A nearby pine had numbers carved into it, 3, 7, 1, 2, with no apparent pattern. But what really sent chills down my spine was what I found behind a cluster of thick bushes. Hidden from view was a makeshift shelter, not the kind you'd expect from a typical homeless camp, but something more deliberate and unsettling. Tarps and branches had been woven together to create a low, tunnel-like structure that you'd have to crawl to enter. Around the shelter's entrance, someone had arranged dozens of small objects, children's toys, mostly broken or dirty, along with pieces of clothing that looked like they'd been there for months. There were stuffed animals with missing eyes, a red wagon with 3 wheels, and several pairs of small shoes lined up in a neat row. The smell coming from inside the shelter was sour and organic, like rotting food mixed with something else I couldn't identify. I radioed for backup immediately, my voice probably betraying more fear than I intended. Within an hour, 2 county sheriff's deputies arrived along with Detective Angela Foster, a sharp-eyed woman in her 42nd who specialized in missing persons cases. We cordoned off the area and began a thorough search of the shelter and surrounding woods. Inside the makeshift dwelling, we found sleeping bags, canned food, and dozens of handwritten notes scattered across the ground. The notes were all in the same handwriting, rambling messages about bringing the lonely ones home and teaching them to sing the right songs. Some of the notes contained what appeared to be schedules with dates and times written next to descriptions like the boy with the red jacket and the girl who walks alone. Detective Foster bagged everything as evidence, her expression growing grimmer with each item we uncovered. But the most disturbing discovery was a collection of photographs tucked inside a waterproof container. Pictures of children playing in parks, walking to school, or riding bikes, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. The investigation that followed revealed details that still make my skin crawl. The shelter belonged to a man named Carl Hendress, a 47-year-old drifter who'd been living off-grid in various forest preserves across the Midwest for over 6 years. He'd been reported missing by his sister in Wisconsin back in 2017, but nobody had been actively looking for him. What made the case even more chilling was the discovery that Hicks had been using recordings of children crying. Actual recordings he'd somehow obtained to lure people deeper into the woods. He'd hidden small battery-powered speakers throughout the forest, controlled by a remote device he kept in his shelter. The plan, according to the notebooks we found, was to attract concerned adults who would come looking for distressed children, then somehow overpower them when they were alone and vulnerable. Detective Foster told me they found evidence linking Hicks to at least 3 missing persons cases from neighboring states, all involving people who disappeared while hiking or camping in remote areas. The most unsettling part was that we never found Hicks himself. By the time we discovered his camp, he'd already vanished into the wilderness. The manhunt that followed lasted 3 weeks and involved search teams from 5 different counties. We combed through every inch of Blackwood Forest Preserve and the surrounding wilderness areas using dogs, helicopters, and thermal imaging equipment. I spent those weeks barely sleeping, constantly looking over my shoulder during my patrols, and jumping at every sound in the woods. The whole experience changed how I viewed the forest I'd called home for years. Places that had once seemed peaceful and familiar now felt menacing and full of hidden dangers. We found more evidence of Hicks's activities scattered throughout the preserve. Additional speakers hidden in tree hollows, more carved messages on distant trees, and several other temporary campsites that showed he'd been moving around the area for months. But the man himself remained a ghost, always one step ahead of our search efforts. Detective Foster theorized that he'd been watching us the whole time, using his knowledge of the terrain to stay hidden while we stumbled around looking for him. The breakthrough came when a park ranger in northern Wisconsin reported finding a similar setup: speakers, carved trees, and disturbing notes in a state forest about 200 meters from our location. The handwriting matched Hicks's perfectly, and the modus operandi was identical. Local authorities set up surveillance around the Wisconsin site, and after 4 days of waiting, they finally spotted him. The arrest happened at dawn on a Wednesday morning in April. Hicks didn't resist when the officers approached his new campsite, almost as if he'd been expecting them. He was gaunt and wild, looking with matted hair and clothes that hadn't been washed in months. During his confession, he admitted to using the crying recordings to lure at least 7 people into remote areas over the past 2 years. Some had managed to escape when they realized they were being hunted, but others weren't so lucky. He claimed he was collecting people who would understand his vision of living away from society, though his methods were clearly predatory and violent. The FBI found evidence linking him to disappearances across 4 states, making him one of the most prolific predators to operate in wilderness areas. Carl Hicks was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the damage he'd done to my sense of security in the woods was permanent. I continued working as a park ranger for another 6 months, but every night shift became an exercise in paranoia. Every sound in the darkness made me tense up. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. I'd find myself constantly checking my radio, making sure backup was just a call away, and I started carrying a sidearm, even though it wasn't required for my position. The preserve installed additional security cameras and improved the lighting along the main trails. But I knew that determined predators would always find ways to exploit the vast, remote areas that make these places so beautiful. Tom and Jake, the hikers who'd first reported the crying, never returned to Blackwood Forest Preserve. Tom called me a few months later to thank me for taking their report seriously, but he admitted that the experience had ruined camping for his family. The thought that someone could use our natural instinct to help children in distress as a weapon was something none of us could easily forget. I eventually transferred to a different park closer to the city, one with shorter trails and more regular foot traffic. The Hicks case taught me that evil can hide anywhere, even in the places we go to find peace and solitude. But it also showed me the importance of trusting your instincts when something doesn't feel right. If Tom and Jake hadn't called that night, if I hadn't taken their report seriously, Hicks might have continued his sick game for months or years longer. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I hear children crying in the distance, but I remind myself that the real monster was caught and locked away. The forest itself isn't evil. It's just a place where people can disappear if they're not careful. These days, I always tell hikers to stay on marked trails, camp in designated areas, and never investigate strange sounds alone. The wilderness can be unforgiving enough without human predators making it worse. As for Hicks, he's spending the rest of his life in a concrete cell, which is exactly where he belongs. I was renting a small 2-bedroom house just outside of Asheville with my boyfriend at the time. The place had this outdated charm, faded floral wallpaper, those yellowed light switches from the 8-second, and a weird little hatch in the hallway ceiling that led to the attic crawl space. Rent was cheap for the area, and the landlord, Mr. Ellis, was one of those old school guys who still used a flip phone and wrote receipts by hand. He barely showed up except to collect rent or mow the patchy front lawn himself, always wearing the same sun-axed Braves cap. We'd only been living there for a few months when things started getting strange. At first, it was little things. My boyfriend Kyle thought I was the one misplacing stuff. Remote on the floor, pantry door half open, a towel knocked off the hook in the bathroom. I brushed it off, figured it was the wind, or maybe I'd done it without thinking. But then came the noises. Subtle at first, soft creaks at night, like wood settling, which every old house has. But then we started hearing them at very specific times, mostly around 2 or 3 a.m. A light thump here, a dragging noise there. Sometimes a soft knock behind the bedroom wall. We tried to explain it away. Mice, maybe a raccoon. The attic wasn't insulated, so animals getting in didn't seem impossible. One night, though, I woke up to what sounded like breathing coming from the vent above our bed. Not loud, not rhythmic, but this low, shallow sound. I sat up in the dark, squinting at the ceiling, heart racing. Kyle didn't hear it. He sleeps like a corpse. But I lay there for almost an hour, too freaked out to even reach for my phone. The next morning, I convinced myself I was just overt tired, and we moved on like nothing happened. The turning point was when Kyle found his earbuds in the kitchen drawer, buried under the oven mitts. That might sound small, but he never put anything there. It was my drawer, filled with my random junk. He swore he left them on his desk. That same week, I noticed my shampoo bottle was moved to the opposite end of the tub, like someone had used it. But we were both out that day until late. I didn't say anything right away, just kept watching. I started putting things in weird positions, tilting the picture frame in the hallway, folding the corners of the toilet paper, tiny traps, and then 3 days later, I found the frame perfectly straight and the toilet paper replaced completely. Brand new roll. Kyle swore it wasn't him. I called Mr. Ellis that afternoon and told him we were hearing noises and thought maybe an animal had gotten into the attic or walls. He didn't seem surprised, just let out this long sigh and said he'd swing by in the morning with a ladder. When he showed up, he brought a flashlight and one of those long metal grabber tools like they use in grocery stores to reach high shelves. He opened the attic hatch, peeked inside, and I watched his face change. No joke. The man went pale. He didn't even climb up, just stood there whispering, "No, no, that's not right." Then he backed away, told us to wait outside, and called the police without even explaining why. 2 officers showed up maybe 20 minutes later. One of them, Officer Brent, climbed into the crawl space with gloves and a respirator, while the other stayed below asking us questions. Brent was up there for a long time. I remember he kept muttering stuff through the insulation like, "Jesus Christ, and you're not going to believe this." When he finally came down, he was holding a crumpled blanket, some plastic grocery bags full of moldy food, and a handful of household items, 2 forks, one of my hair ties, Kyle's baseball cap. Things we hadn't even realized were missing. The worst part? He said it looked like someone had been living up there for a while. Weeks, maybe months. They brought in another unit to go through the whole attic properly, and that's when they found it. There was a small vent behind our bedroom wall, barely noticeable unless you looked for it. Hidden behind the slats was a tiny mounted GoPro, its red light blinking like it had just run out of battery. One of the officers pulled it out with a gloved hand, and I remember Kyle just repeating, "That's our room. That's our bed, man." It hit me then that someone had been watching us. Not just hiding, but observing, recording. The crawl space had a clear line of sight to that vent, like it had been arranged deliberately. The camera had a micro SD card inside. I don't know exactly what was on it. Police never showed us the footage, but I overheard one of them outside say it had weeks of recordings. They confiscated it immediately. That night, Kyle couldn't sleep. I couldn't even walk past the hallway without checking the ceiling. We sat in the living room with all the lights on, barely speaking. Every small sound made my skin crawl. At one point, I caught myself staring at the vent again, wondering how many nights I had gotten dressed, slept, or cried in that room while someone was right above us watching through a tiny slit in the wall. We moved out 2 days later. I didn't even wait for the official notice. I packed a bag, called my sister, who lived across town, and begged her to let us crash in her guest room. Mr. Ellis was understanding, maybe even embarrassed. He said he'd cover the cost of breaking the lease and didn't ask questions. I don't think he wanted to know more than he already did. Police never gave us a name or said whether they caught anyone, but the implication was clear. Whoever had been living in that crawl space had access to our house, probably from the start, and we'd never known. They could have come down while we were sleeping. Hell, they could have stood in the hallway while we were watching television, and we'd have chalked it up to shadows or our imagination. Weeks passed, and I still checked vents in every room I entered. I started locking the bathroom door even when I was home alone. Kyle and I didn't last long after that. He tried to pretend it didn't mess him up, but I think it shook him more than he let on. I remember one night I found him just standing under the hallway hatch, flashlight in hand, not saying a word. I asked what he was doing, and he just said, "Trying to hear if they ever left." We didn't talk about it after that. A detective called me about a month later, said they found fingerprints, but no match in the system. All they could say was that it wasn't a homeless squatter. The setup was too deliberate, too clean in its own twisted way. Whoever it was had picked us, picked me specifically, judging by the placement of the camera. That part stuck with me the most. Not the fact that someone was living above my ceiling. Not even the idea that they watched me sleep. What I still think about is that out of every house on that street, they chose mine. They chose me, and I have no idea why. I live in a 3rd F-floor apartment now. No attic, no crawl space, no vents I can't see into. Every once in a while, I still dream about the blinking red light, and I wake up feeling like someone's just stepped back into the shadows. I don't know if they ever caught the person. I never went back to ask. Maybe that's what scares me the most. Not knowing if they're still out there. Not knowing if one day in some other house, someone else will find that same blinking light and realize they haven't really been alone.